By definition, burnout is identified by a lack of three things: energy, professional efficiency, and a lack of interest in your work. Which, to me, means that burnout isn't like a diagnosable illness, just an umbrella term referring to any point at which a person is experiencing those feelings at the same time. If you were to only go by that logic, then burnout is undeniably real. But that isn't how burnout is usually characterized from my experience, at least not entirely. Every time I watch a video about burnout or hear a friend recount their experience, they describe it as a consistent and lasting feeling. This consistent and long-lasting part of burnout is what I'm referring to when I ask if burnout is real or not, because I have a hunch it isn't something you need to recover from. I'm specifically talking about environments where a person has control over the amount of work they can do, things like university and personal hobbies. This is a scary topic for me to talk about because so much of my most unproductive periods of my life can be credited to feelings that I recognize as burnout. Meaning, if I'm right about this, then I basically wasted my time when I could have done something. Although at the same time, I want to know if it can be controlled, so I can stop it from being something I let fester. For context, in my final year of secondary school, or high school if you're in America, I worked a lot. So long as I made sure I studied a lot and was studying the right way, my efforts were always met with the equivalent result: good grades and encouragement from people seeing my progress. It felt good to do the work and work well, because I believed my efforts would be rewarded and that I was progressing towards becoming a person I wanted to be. And I was. I worked almost all day, every day for an entire year and didn't feel burned out one bit. Conversely, during my time in secondary school, I developed a particular interest in motion graphics. It turned into a hobby of mine and a skill I wanted to master. I wanted to work on this skill during my final year, to maybe possibly turn it into a career. I worked on it for 2 weeks, then never touched it again for the entire year. I didn't fully recover from that feeling for 2 years after the fact. I stepped away from it for months. I came back to it sometimes to work on new ideas, but it took ages to get past that initial hurdle of starting it. In every attempt I thought, that's it, I have to go back to taking a break because I'm still burned out. But every now and then I would unconsciously break past that hurdle. Suddenly my passion for the hobby came back. I couldn't break myself away from the project I was working on, and I felt like my cycle of burnout had finally gone. But as soon as I finished or gave up on that project, all those feelings immediately came back and the process started all over again. And sometimes I just...
Nuke Radio. We make your eardrums bleed.
I just shoved a nuke up my pussy.
She don't use Instagram, she be using Shanagram.
I don't think depression is real, by the way. This sounds awful, so what is that? But no, I just don't subscribe to burnout. I thought I felt burnout in the past, but I've just realized, no, this is a mental barrier that I'm putting in myself that I've created.
I think all three factors of burnout are influenced by my mood. I'll feel tired if I'm sad, even if I got 8 hours of sleep. I'll feel a lack of interest in working if I'm upset, even if I really want to. And I think my mood is influenced by my mindset. When I'm in a period of exceptionally hard work, I start to ask myself more questions and rethinking old ones. And with an amount of stress, I'm more likely to come up with logical conclusions that seem more grim than they could have been or otherwise used to be. I believe this is the reason some people perceptively have more resilience to burnout than others. If I don't take the necessary time to reevaluate those thoughts on a less pessimistic mode of thinking, then it will pretty quickly show itself in my mood and conversely my work, no matter how much I try to persevere through it. Taking time to myself does not resolve burnout. My brain will still associate those familiar thought patterns and negative feelings with my work, and it will be unnecessarily harder to do if I don't address the thoughts I have and try to convince myself otherwise. How you go about convincing yourself is subjective, but I recommend always making sense to yourself. Avoid vague answers like, you never know what the future holds, because I found, at least for me, that my brain isn't persuaded by those kind of answers. Instead, for an example, if you feel like your skills in drawing will lead you anywhere career-wise, make sure you have a clearer answer on what a career as an artist actually looks like. Make sure you know what you're working towards and what possibly needs to change in order to facilitate it. And make sure that if your career in art fails, that you aren't left with nowhere to go. Plan out realistic alternatives that you could take, and keep your bias in check so you don't misinform yourself on a possible career option just because it's not what you wanted. I find that this rule helps me a lot because it reduces the constant what-if voices that reoccur in my head during stressful moments. If you have a good answer for most things, eventually you'll find less to worry about. Also, this should go without saying, but don't physically or mentally beat yourself up when you're burned out. Get consistent sleep, don't call yourself a stupid idiot and whatnot, because otherwise your brain will start associating that work that you're doing with those negative feelings, and it will be harder to get yourself to do it. Like, imagine a kid getting hit in the head with a football. You might not want to play football after that, you know? You want to make it as easy as possible. Okay, that was a bad example. Instead, imagine a kid goes to 5 football games, and in each one of those football games, he gets hit in the head with a football. Eventually, his brain will start associating going to football matches with getting hit in the head with a football, and he'll feel naturally inclined to just not go to them. The more I experimented with the idea of discipline, the more I realized how susceptible I am, and presumably most people are, to their own instincts. I understand long-term benefits, but I feel a natural disdain towards them. I think this is why I was able to work so hard in school, yet gave up so quickly on my hobby. I could feel my progress with school, and I was given a number reflective of my efforts, which was exacerbated by the fact my grades were so low the year before. Compare that to my hobby, where I was my only critic. I knew that long-term my skills would improve, but it was hard to believe that when I hadn't established what I needed to do to get there, and I could see a stagnation in my skills. This is all to say that I don't think your work needs to stop during burnout. You definitely won't find it easy to work if you form bad habits or a lot of cynical conclusions about your work, but I believe they're recoverable through re-evaluation and a new system of habits that rehabilitate an optimistic mindset. All things you need to learn how to do through work. And this is only for the worst case scenario. In most cases, I think people come to the conclusion that they're burned out too often, when all they needed to do was answer a few questions. Oh my god, I'm going to bed.